The Simpson household was a fortress under siege, its walls trembling under the relentless assault of rats. Not ordinary rodents, but grotesque, ravenous creatures with glinting eyes and teeth that never dulled. Their scratching and gnawing formed a ceaseless symphony, a cacophony of hunger that filled the night. Furniture was reduced to splinters, wallpaper peeled away in tatters, and the air carried the sour stench of decay. In this alternate Springfield, the rats were eternal, a plague that defined existence, and the Simpsons fought a losing battle. To survive, Marge stood in the kitchen, her hands raw and trembling as she hammered boards over the pantry door. The rats had gotten to Maggie's formula again, leaving empty cans strewn across the floor, their edges chewed into jagged metal. Maggie wailed in her high chair, and Marge's heart raced as she spotted a rat scuttling toward the baby. With a scream, she swung a broom, knocking the creature away. But more emerged from the shadows, their eyes fixed on her daughter. Desperate, she scooped Maggie into her arms, her fingers brushing against the child's skin, searching for bites. The rats were everywhere, and no barricade held them for long. Upstairs, Bart was a boy possessed. His room a workshop of makeshift traps. He rigged wires and tin cans, baited with scraps of moldy bread, hoping to outsmart the vermin. But these rats were cunning, almost sentient. One trap snapped shut, only for the rat to wriggle free, its Jongjen scattering the bait. Bart's smirk faded as a pair of rodents lunged at him, their teeth grazing his arm. He stumbled back, heart pounding, and kicked the trap across the room. The rats didn't retreat. They watched, their eyes gleaming with malice, as if mocking his efforts. Bart's bravado was crumbling, replaced by a creeping dread that these creatures were more than animals. Lisa, ever the scholar, sought answers in the dim light of her bedroom. She pored over a biology book, its pages brittle and yellowed, noting the rats' unnatural size and coordination. These weren't mere pests. They moved like a hive, their squeaks almost a language. Her pen scratched furiously, documenting their behavior, but a chill ran down her spine as she realized they were watching her. A rat perched on her desk, its whiskers twitching, and Lisa froze. It didn't attack. It stared, as if studying her back. She shooed it away, but the encounter left her convinced. Something greater drove these creatures, something buried deep in Springfield's rotting heart. Homer was no stranger to suffering at the nuclear plant, but tonight was worse. The ducts echoed with the skittering of rats, their shadows dancing in the flickering green glow of the reactors. One leaped from a pipe, sinking its teeth into his arm. Homer yelped, flailing, but the pain lingered, a burning itch that spread. He scratched until his skin bled, convinced he felt them crawling inside him. The other workers were gone, fled or devoured, and Homer's laughter, once a shield, turned manic. He stumbled through the plant, muttering to himself, "The rats," trailing him like a grotesque entourage. Night brought no respite. The family huddled in the living room, the rats bolder now, pouring through cracks in the walls. Bart woke screaming, a rat on his face, its claws tangled in his hair. Marge yanked it off, hurling it against the wall, but the creature scurried away unharmed. Maggie's cries pierced the air, and Marge clutched her tighter, her murmurs of comfort drowned by the gnawing. Lisa clutched a tattered book she'd found in the attic, its cover half-eaten, its pages whispering of ancient plagues. Before she could read more, rats swarmed the book, tearing it to shreds. She salvaged a single fragment, a scrawled note about a rat king linked to the nuclear plant. Bart's dreams offered no escape. He saw himself engulfed by rats, their bodies merging into a writhing, toothy mass that spoke his name. He woke to find a rat on his chest, its eyes locked on his, and for a moment he swore it grinned. Marge, cradling Maggie, was unraveling. She whispered to herself, her voice a fragile thread, her eyes darting to every shadow. The rats were winning, and her strength was fading. As dawn broke, Lisa sat amid the ruins of her research, the fragment about the Rat King clutched in her hand. The nuclear plant loomed in her mind, a festering wound at Springfield's core. She didn't know what the Rat King was, but she felt its presence, a malevolent force orchestrating the plague. The family was battered, their home a ruin, but Lisa's resolve hardened. The answers lay in the plant, and she would find them, no matter the cost. Springfield was a city devoured, its streets choked with the skittering of rats and the stench of decay. The plague that tormented the Simpsons was no less merciless beyond their walls, gnawing at the soul of every citizen. The rats, with their endless hunger and eerie cunning, had turned the town into a graveyard of hope, where survival was a daily descent into madness. The Simpsons' struggle was but a fragment of a larger nightmare, as Springfield's inhabitants faced their own horrors under the shadow of the insatiable horde. At the nuclear plant, Mr. Burns thrived in the chaos. He had transformed a reactor chamber into a grotesque rat farm, where the creatures were fed scraps, and if whispers were true, the bodies of workers who crossed him. The rats swarmed around him, their eyes glinting with something like reverence as Burns cackled, his skeletal frame silhouetted against the green glow. He tossed rancid meat into the writhing mass, muttering about loyalty and power as if the rats were his subjects. Yet even he flinched when their squeaks grew too loud, a reminder that his control was a fragile illusion. Ned Flanders clung to faith in his crumbling home, where the leftorium lay in ruins, its shelves gnawed to sawdust. He knelt before a tattered Bible, praying for deliverance, but the rats invaded his sanctuary, their claws tearing at the holy pages. Ned's cheerful demeanor cracked as he swatted them away, his prayers turning to sobs. The rodents circled him, their eyes mocking his devotion, and for the first time he wondered if God had abandoned Springfield. His faith, once unshakable, was eroding under the weight of the relentless plague. At Springfield Elementary, Principal Skinner was a man unmoored. The school was a battlefield, its halls littered with chewed books and broken desks. Rats poured from the vents, biting students and teachers alike. Skinner, desperate to maintain order, consumed poisoned scraps in a delusional bid for immunity, his hands trembling as he patrolled the corridors. His eyes darted to every shadow, seeing rats where none existed, and his once stern voice was now a paranoid whisper. The children's screams echoed behind him, a chorus of fear he could no longer silence. Krusty, the clown's television studio, was a macabre spectacle. His show continued, but the audience of children shrieked as rats lunged from the seats, their teeth sinking into small legs. Krusty, his face caked with makeup to hide oozing bite marks, delivered grim jokes about the plague to a silent crowd. "What's worse than a rat in your soup? 100 in your bed," he bellowed, his laughter hollow. The cameras rolled, capturing his descent into despair as the rats gnawed at the studio's wiring, plunging the set into darkness. In the Quickie Mart, Apu was a prisoner of terror. Rats infested every shelf, devouring snacks and scurrying over. His feet, bites covered his legs, each wound a burning reminder of his vulnerability. He stood behind the counter clutching a broom, but his eyes saw rats in every flicker of light, even in empty corners. His once calm demeanor was gone, replaced by a trembling panic that left him muttering prayers in a language he barely remembered. The store, his livelihood, was now a tomb. Across Springfield, the plague's horrors deepened. Some citizens clawed at their skin, screaming of rats burrowing inside them, their minds shattered by fear. Others, in a grotesque mimicry, began to act like the rodents, gnawing wood and scuttling on all fours, their humanity slipping away. Black holes appeared in the streets, swallowing homes and people whole, as if the rats were consuming reality itself. The town was unraveling, its fabric torn by a force no one could name, Lisa, haunted by the Rat King fragment, tried to warn the town. She stood in the square, shouting about the nuclear plant, but the citizens, broken and terrified, ignored her pleas. Only Professor Frink listened, his glasses fogged with sweat as he babbled about experimental devices to fight the rats. Together, they resolved to venture into the plant, seeking the source of the nightmare. As they prepared, the rats watched from the shadows, their squeaks a sinister promise of what awaited. The nuclear plant loomed over Springfield like a festering wound, its rusted towers exhaling a sickly green glow. Lisa and Professor Frink descended into its depths, their flashlight beams trembling against the darkness. The tunnels were alive, with rats, their eyes glinting like malevolent stars, their squeaks a chorus of hunger. Frink's gadgets, cobbled together contraptions of wires and bulbs, sputtered and sparked, barely keeping the rodents at bay. Each step forward was a defiance of the terror that gnawed at their sanity, but Lisa clung to the fragment's warning of the Rat King, determined to end the plague that had devoured her town. In a forgotten laboratory, they found remnants of forbidden experiments, shattered vials, gnawed papers, and cryptic notes hinting at rats infused with something beyond science, something ancient, insatiable. The documents crumbled as Lisa touched them, devoured by unseen teeth, leaving only whispers of truth. Frink's muttering grew frantic, his calculations unraveling as rats swarmed closer, their claws scraping the concrete. A sudden shriek echoed behind them, and Lisa turned to see Homer, his eyes wild and empty, crawling through the shadows. He babbled to the rats, calling them friends, and lunged at Lisa, his hands clawing like paws. Tears stung her eyes as she fled, leaving her father to the darkness, his laughter melding with the rodent's squeals. Deep within the plant, they reached the heart of the nightmare, the Rat King. It was no mere creature, but a pulsating abomination, a mountain of writhing fur, flesh, and countless eyes. Its form, woven from thousands of rats, fused into a single grotesque entity. The air thrummed with its power, a radioactive pulse that twisted their minds. Lisa saw visions of Springfield's ruin, her family reduced to bones, their screams drowned by gnashing teeth. Frink, trembling, aimed his last invention, a jury-rigged bomb. But the rats surged, enveloping him in a writhing tide. His screams faded as the rodents consumed him, leaving Lisa alone before the monstrous king. The Rat King spoke without words, its thoughts burrowing into Lisa's mind, feeding on her fear. It showed her the truth. It thrived on Springfield's despair, an eternal parasite that no weapon could slay. Lisa's resolve faltered, her hope crumbling under the weight of its gaze. She staggered back, clutching her head, as the creature's laughter, a cacophony of squeaks, filled the chamber. Desperate, she fled to the surface, calling for the town to unite against the horror. But Springfield was broken. In the streets, she found citizens transformed, some clawing at their flesh, others kneeling before rat effigies, chanting in guttural tones. A cult had formed, worshipping the Rat King as a god, offering blood to appease its hunger. Lisa rallied the few, who still resisted, Ned, Apu, Skinner, but their eyes were hollow, their spirits crushed. They marched to the plant, armed with torches and tools, a pitiful army against an infinite foe. In the chamber, the Rat King pulsed larger, its form spilling beyond the walls, tendrils of fur and teeth lashing out. The townsfolk fought, but their blows were futile. The rats swarmed, tearing flesh and spirit alike. Lisa screamed for courage, but the creature fed on their terror, growing stronger with each cry. The plant shuddered, its structure collapsing in a roar of metal and dust, burying Lisa and the Rat King in a tomb of rubble. Yet the horror endured. From the ruins, rats poured forth, an unstoppable tide spreading through Springfield's remains. The town was silent now, its streets empty, save for the skittering of claws. Those who survived were no longer human. Their minds shattered, crawling like rodents, gnawing at scraps in the shadows. The Rat King lived on, its presence a whisper in the wind, its hunger eternal. Springfield was gone, consumed by a plague that knew no end, and the endless scratching of rats was the only sound left in a world without hope.